Some number of years ago, I visited Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America, to request an audience with the acting president at the time. I do not recall his name offhand, but if memory serves, he was a great devotee of McDonald's cuisine, and I thought perhaps he might be interested in my investigation vis-à-vis McDonald's pizza. However, I was not granted an audience with the president. Instead, I was granted an audience with some Secret Service agents. All due respect to them, but to this day I am somewhat displeased with the unnecessary and unprofessional curtness with which I was treated.
Hi, my name is Brian Thompson. I'm an investigative journalist, and I was wondering if I might be able to go inside the White House and speak with Mr. Trump today.
You have an appointment?
I don't, but I'm a journalist.
You have an appointment?
I don't, but I'm a journalist.
I don't care who you are. Do you have an appointment?
I don't, but I'm a journalist. Is he not speaking?
He's not here.
Journalist? What do you mean he's not here?
If you have any questions, you can call our headquarters. And that's for the public information officer.
Do you know where he is?
What did I tell you?
I can call your headquarters?
That's correct.
What's the number for that?
You can Google it.
What should I Google?
To calm my nerves, I took a stroll around the grounds outside the White House. It was here that I made a fateful encounter with a gentleman handing out various pamphlets of a religious and conspiratorial nature.
The Fourth Reich. You know the Fourth Reich was supposed to start?
That's a picture of the Pope Francis?
Pope Francis, you see that? Look, with the crown. Where is he wearing a crown? In Roma.
It looks like an egg-shaped hat. That's a crown?
That's a triple crown.
Very intriguing.
Triple crown.
If I can ask you a possibly related question, do you remember when McDonald's used to serve pizza?
That's a Tim.
No. Why? I never... How long ago was that?
Oh, it was in the late 80s and early 90s. They used to serve pizza, and they don't anymore. I'm trying to get to the bottom of that as well.
Yeah. Okay. We dodged a bullet by not having Hillary Clinton Rockefeller in the White House. We just dodged a bullet. A big one. So if you're not familiar with the Bible, if you're not familiar with Holy Scripture...
I am a devout Christian, but I have not read any of the Bible yet.
What is that Savior's name? What is the Messiah's name?
Are you speaking of Jesus Christ, the son of Mary with no last name?
Jesus is a Latin name. What Jewish mother would give her son a Latin name under Roman occupation?
So you're saying Mary was Jewish?
Her name was Miriam. She was Jewish. He was king of the Jews.
Well, that narrows down last names, I guess.
His name was Joshua.
Look, what was his last name? Do you know?
Joshua ben David. He was the son of David. Joshua ben David.
Joshua ben David. So Mary's last name was Ben David?
Yeah. See,
that's
the Messiah. The Jewish Messiah, Joshua of Nazareth, had a Hebrew name which means Jehovah saves.
You're reading from another one of your pamphlets. May I have a copy of that one?
Jehovah saves.
Thank you.
You have them all.
I was eternally grateful to this gentleman for imparting the wisdom of the God family's last name upon me. Ever since this chance encounter, my faith has only deepened. I never expected to see this man again. One reason is that I live on the opposite side of the country from Washington, D.C., and I am afraid this gentleman could not afford to fly out to Los Angeles and visit me on a common pamphleteer's salary. Another reason is that I did not share any contact information with this gentleman, and the pamphlets he gave me contain no contact information for him either. This is probably prudent, as the controversial information contained within them concerning sensitive topics such as the last names of deities and the extraterrestrial origins of human civilization would most likely make him a target of assassination by the various secret clubs of shape-shifting satanic reptoids I read about in one of his pamphlets. Or perhaps including his contact information just slipped his mind. Regardless, years passed, until one day, just this past week, I found myself kneeling on the concrete bed of the LA River, lowering my face into the shallow sewer water so that my soul might slip from my body and rise to heaven for a meeting with the God whose full name I now knew to be God Ben David. But just before I did the deed, I was interrupted by the splash of a man falling from a nearby footbridge. Longtime listeners will remember yesterday's episode of the program where I recounted this very tale. Assuming you did not doze off during the show, you will remember that this man called my name, that he implored me to cease my self-drowning for the sake of the world, and that I should remember who he was. Well, I did remember. He was the very pamphleteer I had met in Washington, D.C. Only now, his pamphlets were all wet. Welcome to a special Christmas Day continuation of Whatever Happened to Pizza at McDonald's, the investigative journalism program where I ask the question, whatever happened to the pizza at McDonald's? I'm your host, Brian Thompson.
So help me with this barricade. No surrender, no defeat. A specter's haunting Albert Street. I am your pamphleteer. I'm your pamphleteer.
I sat with the pamphleteer at the water's edge, careful to keep at least 6 feet away from him at all times. I told him this was due to concerns I had about once again contracting the COVID-19 coronavirus. But this was a metaphorically white, literal lie. The truth was, I simply did not want to sit too close to someone soaked with sewer water from the LA River. He explained his name was Terrence, and he had been looking for me for some time. He read in one of his pamphlets that I would be drowning myself due to not receiving enough new donors during my Patreon pledge drive. The pamphlet went on to say this would be a huge mistake with grave consequences for the humanity of the future. I had a few questions. First of all, how could he read about something in one of his pamphlets that he did not already know? Was he not the very publisher of said pamphlets? A common mistake, he said consolingly, yet in a tone I could not help but notice sounded a tad patronizing. I don't write the contents of my pamphlets, nor do I publish them. They arrive in bundles outside my door, seemingly at random. One day I'll wake up to find dozens of pamphlets about how everyone should take their money out of the banks and invest it in gold. A month or two will go by, and another shipment appears. Perhaps a few dozen pamphlets about how Noah's Ark was really a spaceship. Once a whole year went by without my receiving any pamphlets. Then I found 6 boxes full of them, all about how there was a television program people thought was scripted fiction, but was actually a documentary filmed in a parallel reality. Really? I said. Which show was this? He answered, The Love Boat. Terrence further explained that while he had no idea where these pamphlets came from, he knew they must be important. This is why he handed them out in front of the White House. It was one of the main tourist destinations in Washington, D.C., and thus had a lot of foot traffic. I asked why he didn't just publish them on the internet, where they would be accessible to perhaps billions more people, but he pretended to have trouble hearing me on account of the water in his ears. Which brought me to my next question. How did he find me here in the LA River, thousands of miles away from his home? I just followed the map, he said, holding up a rather massively unfolded map printed on one side of a pamphlet. Sure took a while, he added. It was then I noticed his feet. Or rather, I noticed the mud and blood-caked lumps at the end of his legs where a person's feet should be. He must have walked across the entire country, barefoot by the looks of it. I was simultaneously flattered and frightened. Flattered that he would go to so much trouble to find me, and frightened that he might ask to borrow a pair of my shoes. I was just checking my position on the map a few moments ago, he continued, when a breeze kicked up and blew the pamphlet out of my hand. I reached over the railing of that footbridge to catch it, and must have slipped. Didn't even see you there until I was down on my back in the drink. His metaphorical usage of the word drink to describe the fetid sewer water of the LA River momentarily soured my stomach, so I quickly changed the subject. "But why are you here?" I asked. "Why would anyone possibly want to stop me from drowning myself?" "Why, it's all in the pamphlet," he said. At this, he folded up the map and showed me the front page of the leaflet on which it was printed. I squinted to read it. "You want me to scooch a little closer?" Terrence said. I thought quickly. "No, thank you," I said. "COVID concerns and so forth." He read the title aloud. The Death of Investigative Journalist Brian Thompson, and Its Consequences. Nearby, Mark McGrath's church's bell rang. "Sorry about that," I apologized. "It usually only lasts a minute." We sat in awkward silence as we waited out the irritating din. Finally, I said, "You do not understand. It would be impossible for me to permanently pass away from my self-drowning. True, the medical professional I had contracted to revive me metaphorically flaked this morning, but I have this sign instructing any passers-by to check me for brain activity and either perform CPR or drive me to the nearest hospital. Depending on how quickly my heart is restarted, the whole ordeal should have no more negative consequences than some mild permanent brain damage." "This is partially true," Terrence conceded. "According to the pamphlet, you do survive the drowning. It says here an aspiring chiropractor jogging along the riverwalk finds you lying technically deceased face down in the water. He tries to revive you by cracking your spine in a few places, but it turns out that kind of junk is totally worthless, medically speaking. So instead, he just zaps you with the taser he takes on his jogs to fend off coyotes. That wakes you right up. You've lost about 17% of your brain function, but that's okay. I think I remember reading in one of my pamphlets that humans only use like 5% of their brains." I ask him if there is anything in the pamphlet about whether I completed my mission of leaving my body to enter the city of heaven, and ask the God why more people don't donate to my Patreon. He said, indeed, there was some mention of this. According to the pamphlet, I did meet with the God, and he kindly explained the reason more people don't donate to my Patreon is that I do not do enough paywalling. "You have to make some episodes Patreon exclusives," Terrence said. "Maybe even most episodes." "But my program is too narrative for that," I replied. "If some episodes are only accessible by Patreon donors, then the listeners who only hear the free episodes will miss out on important information. The storylines will not make any sense." Terrence grinned. "Exactly," he said. I pondered this thought, then said, "Well, this is a very interesting situation. So the God told me to do more paywalling?" "Oh, no," Terrence replied. "That's just my own personal opinion, as someone who operates a very successful Patreon. Just $5 a month, and you can support an independent pamphleteer. For $20 a month, I'll even mail you a signed pamphlet." "If you do not mind my asking, how much money do you make from your Patreon?" I asked, assuming he did not mind. "That's personal," he replied. "The point is, you don't die from drowning yourself. At least not directly. According to the pamphlet, when you lose brain function and go limp, your jaw muscles loosen, and a bunch of this LA River water flows right into your mouth. I don't know if you know, but a lot of this is actually raw sewage." A breeze blowing in my direction brought with it a whiff of the odor emanating from Terrence's damp clothes. I winced and nodded. He continued, "Says here, a few days later, you pass away for good." "From what exactly?" I asked. "Diarrhea," he said. "Diarrhea?" I replied. By way of explanation, he said, They don't call it diarrhea for nothing. Terence went on to read more information from his mysterious pamphlet. After my somewhat untimely and lots what undignified death, my work as an investigative journalist passed into obscurity. Of course, my IJP was still held up by my peers as the highest achievement of the medium, but the public at large began to lose even more interest in the topic of McDonald's pizza than they already had. Soon, barely a mention was made in online listicles or cryptic tweets from the official McDonald's social media accounts of pizza's existence. Even the non-canonical brick oven pizza served at the novelty truck stop McDonald's in Orlando passed into the mists of history when the entire state of Florida voluntarily broke itself off from the continental United States and sank itself beneath the sea rather than submit to a federal mandate ordering that children be taught to read. According to the pamphlet, it was not very long before no one remembered me at all. Mention the name Brian Thompson, and investigative journalism was the last thing to come to mind. If the name ever rang any metaphorical bell, it was only in reference to the rugged character actor Brian Thompson, who is marginally famous for his appearances in genre fare, such as The X-Files, etc. I was greatly unnerved by this account of my future, and also the future beyond my future. Until this very moment, I was certain my work would become some of the most important investigative journalism ever produced by human society. The attention brought to McDonald's pizza by my efforts would hopefully be too much for McDonald's to ignore. Not only would it return to the menu in its original recipe, but I would also find the answer to my primary question, that being, whatever happened to it? With this task accomplished, I would write a series of books that would be available at all major retailers and public libraries, documenting not only my investigation, but also the inspiring details of my life. My works would rival even the greatest achievements of nonfiction literature, including Woodward and Berenstein's All the President's Men and Art Bell's The Art of Talk. I say this with all humility, but I was shocked to learn there may be a future in which I am not one of the most well-known and well-loved figures of all time. I begged Terence for more information about this pamphlet. Where did it come from? Who wrote it? How can we know it can be trusted? He could answer very few of these questions, just as he could not answer them in regards to any of the other pamphlets that appeared at his doorstep. But he assured me the others had largely proven correct in their assertions. The God's last name really is Ben David, he explained, and also there is almost no credible scientific evidence that the Earth isn't flat. I was a bit unsure about one of these points, but I could not refute the fact that the pamphlet warning of my death bore a definitive copyright notice, dating it to the year 2043. And there was more. It says here you'll be skeptical of what this pamphlet has to say, Terence said, but there's a little X mark on the map. Looks like it's pretty close to us. The X is labeled Proof. Here, want to take a look? He tossed me the soggy pamphlet, and it landed at my feet with a splat. I politely declined to touch it, citing the possibility that it could have been infected with Terence's COVID-laden spittle. But I trusted him to lead me to the spot marked with an X, albeit at an odor-proof distance. We walked along the river a short way until we came to a circular opening in the concrete lining. It was a drain pipe, roughly 4 feet in diameter, and it extended into darkness. This looks like the place, Terence said, holding up the map. Guess we should go inside. Actually, I interjected, maybe I should go in by myself. It looks fairly cramped and stuffy in there, not very much air circulation. The kind of confined space where odors that may or may not be emanating from one or more of us would be difficult to avoid. Also COVID, etc. Suit yourself, Terence said, absently picking at a foot-sized scab covering the bottom of one of his bare feet. Quickly turning away in horror, I entered the pipe. Soon the light from the opening faded, and I navigated only by touching the curved concrete encircling my person. I do not know how long I shuffled through this tunnel, but eventually I spotted what appeared to be the glow of sunlight in the distance. At that moment, my foot struck something hard and plastic. At the impact, I heard the muffled sound of a bell. Looking down, in the faint glow of the distant light, I could see a desktop telephone of the touch-tone variety. Not unlike the type of telephone I imagined adorned the desk of McDonald's executive Ray Kroc in the late 1980s when he was first shown the plans for the rollout of McDonald's pizza. Adhered to the handset was a narrow label, black with raised white lettering, the kind of label that might have been made by an office label maker. I could barely make out the words in the dim light. It read, "Telephone to the future." So this was the proof promised by the pamphlet. With this telephone, I would be able to dial someone in the dystopian world prophesied after my death and have them corroborate the pamphlet's claims. But who would I call? Or even, whom? I could only hope that in this future there were still public libraries, and that they were still the seats of all knowledge. Thankfully, due to my bi-daily inquiries as to whether anyone has returned their missing DVD of the film Willow 1, the number to my local public library was the only telephone number I had memorized.
Studio City Library, this is the reference desk. How may I help you?
Hi, I was wondering if you had any books by or about Brian Thompson.
And this is the actor that you're referring to?
No, not the actor, the investigative journalist. Very well known.
Okay.
Is the actor still alive? Do you know offhand?
There is. An actor who I guess. Let's see, what was he known for? I guess a fair amount of television as well as some action films. Is that
Yes, mostly genre fare, The X-Files, etc. I was just wondering.
Exactly.
Pardon me for asking. I know this is perhaps an unusual question, but could you please tell me what year it is?
It's 2043. All right, let's see. Okay, yes, I'm seeing in my Google search something called How to Be an Investigative Journalist by Brian Thompson, but the library doesn't own it.
Oh, okay. So it just isn't very popular then?
That is, let's see, it says, it was independently published. It's, let's see, it looks like it may have been self-published. The note on Amazon says publishers, under publisher, independently published. Yeah, so that's probably part of the reason that we don't have it. We don't tend to have much in the way of independently published.
I see. Well, self-publishing does not carry the stigma that it once did, but I understand.
True, yeah, and in fact, I mean, the library even does have something that called Self-E, where we actually do encourage people to submit their own works that way.
Oh, you do? Okay, well, that is good to know.
Yeah.
So you've never heard of Brian Thompson or his work?
I'm not familiar with him, no.
Okay. Well, that is very interesting. Well, thank you very much for your help.
Oh, yes, of course. Absolutely. Yeah, you have a good one.
You too.
All right, take care. Bye.
Goodbye. It was true. It was all true. I shuffled back down the tunnel the way I came, eager to tell Terence the good news about his pamphlet and hoping he wasn't standing too close to the opening. But when I emerged back into the nearly empty concrete riverbed of the LA River, I found Terence standing even further away than that. In fact, he was nowhere to be seen. The only evidence of his presence was a soggy pamphlet lying on the ground. Its front page read, "The Death of Investigative Journalist Brian Thompson, and its Consequences." I thought about picking the pamphlet up and storing it in my archives, but I decided against it. It was much too gross. On my short walk home, I considered the extraordinary events that had just taken place. As I mentioned in part 1 of this special Christmas program, I do not know if the church with the annoying bell has ever played host to a miracle before. My encounter with Terence and his mystical pamphlet and the magic time phone technically occurred only nearby the church grounds, but it was most certainly a paranormal event tantamount to a miracle. If the God Ben David did not see fit to work another supernatural wonder within the church's legal property, say, for example, causing their bell to break free of its mounting and burst into a million tiny pieces on the street below, then I suppose my experience being stopped from drowning myself and contracting fatal diarrhea would have to count. When I arrived back at my headquarters/apartment, I thought what a shame it was that once again Terence and I had not exchanged contact information. I would very much like to question him further about these pamphlets he receives. Perhaps I could even stake out the front of his home and watch for whoever delivers them overnight. But whoever or whatever this mysterious pamphlet delivery entity is, they must be a creature not entirely of this world. A creature of great wisdom that extends outside the confines of time and space as we know them. A creature with some very strange and borderline racially questionable ideas about ancient aliens and secret cabals. But like the LA River, the streams of fate flow freely, metaphorically speaking. And perhaps my stream and Terence's stream will one day cross again. Just as I had this thought, I realized my mind turned to this stream metaphor in part because I was hearing the sound of running water coming from my bathroom. I knocked on the closed door and heard Terence shout from inside. "Just showering all this sewer water off," he said. "I hope you don't mind." I shuddered at the thought of cleaning out the drain, but assured him it was okay. And when he finally emerged fresh and clean as a rinsed pamphleteer, I did not even turn him down when he asked to borrow a pair of my shoes. We said our goodbyes, and as he turned to walk back across the entire United States to his hometown of Washington, D.C., I stopped him for a moment. "Mr. Terence, I cannot help but feel somewhat conflicted about one thing," I said. "If that pamphlet is right, and I have every reason to think it is, then if I died today, all my work would disappear. But I have been pursuing the McDonald's pizza case for quite a while. If my mark has not already been made, doesn't that mean that right now, at this very moment, I am somewhat of a failure?" Terence looked at me with kind eyes. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "no man is a failure who does investigative journalism."
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days a lang syne? For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne.
Do you know what happened to pizza at McDonald's? Do you remember it? Please send all correspondence to pizza@mcdonalds@gmail.com. To support the show, please join my Patreon at patreon.com/pizza@mcd's for exclusive benefits. And for more information, including important announcements, useful links, educational blog posts, etc., visit pizza@mcdonalds.com. Thank you to my invaluable Patreon producers: Isabella Zelaskowski, Jacob Ford, Joe Kajik, Kimberly King, Kyle Tarak, Pam Gabriel, Will, Andrew Duffy, Andrew Ahmed Johnson Rubin, Billy Jean, Brad Allen Thompson, David Friedman, Felix Dooley, Jay Poop, Calvin Thomas, Kat Resney, Laurel Paul, Mel, Mitchell Kordick, Opus Mareshi, Grant Bacon, Gerald Lewis, and Ryan Guggenmoss. I'm Brian Thompson, investigative journalist.